How do you achieve an absolutely perfect Goldilocks level of game monetization? Hello and welcome to Growth Masterminds, the podcast for growth marketers. My name is John here. Today, we're continuing our series on top gaming trends for 2025. We're talking about monetization, hybrid monetization, ad monetization, finding just the right level of monetization, plus seeing how many times we can say the word monetization. Guess it, get it right. You win a prize. Ping me on LinkedIn. We have the right guy to talk about that. If my math is right, he's 40% of 2.5 gamers. He consults with all the top game publishers. He's irreverent, funny, wicked smart. I feel like I should say that in a Boston accent, wicked smart. And his name is Felix Braberg. Welcome, Felix.
I'm blushing.
How you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me on and giving me so much credit. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. No, it's all good. It's all good. What are you breaking lately?
What am I breaking? Well, in terms of news or what?
Everything, anything. I don't know. Whatever.
Well,
What's up? What's late?
stuff.
What's new?
Stuff right now is just a lot of work. There's a lot of interesting thing happening on the hybrid side and a lot of games getting into that space. It's a really interesting thing to watch. There's a lot of companies that are kind of pioneering it and then a lot of people wanting to get into the space. So I feel there's quite a lot of innovation happening and particularly there's a couple of studios who seem to be able to do no wrong. And it's just interesting to see that some people are saying mobile is dead. I don't think it's dead. It just seems taking harder.
Well, I'll give you a tip about all that work that you're facing right now. If you just suck a little bit more, then you will get less of it. Pro tip, you got it here first. Okay, cool. We're going to talk about monetization in games, when you should build it, how to decide what models, which ones you should use, what trends you're seeing, how to maximize monetization without squeezing too hard, all that stuff, a lot of balance questions and some measurement. We'll see what we all get to. Let's maybe start at the beginning. When in your game's life cycle should you be building your monetization model, and should it evolve over time?
So I can only speak for ads, right? And ad monetization, which seems to be kind of one of these still evergreen things in our industry. There's evergreen games, hyper casual still going down a bit, but hybrid casual has majority ads revenue, right? And I can tell you out of working with several studios, the ones who tend to be able to scale to the 50 to 100K a day, which is considered mid to big tier, there's one commonality that I see. And that is that basically they start thinking about it from day one, but they test, right? So it's all about A/B testing and just seeing what works. So, right, like if you launch a game, let's say you're working on a dice game, right? You basically assume nothing. The best teams basically start by doing some UA creative tests, see what kind of CPIs are low. Then they start by building stuff and just A/B testing things. And the best studios are the ones where the people who are calling the shots also know kind of what they're getting paid on the other side, right? That's what I see is the biggest disconnect between people who have games that fail and who succeed. If a CEO or a product leader knows how much you actually get for an interstitial impression in like non-US geos and how much you get for one in the US geos, you can start to design a gameplay around that. So what does that look like in real life? So let's say you have a game that you want to do a puzzle game, right? If you want to optimize towards interstitial and basically earning majority of revenue from interstitials, you need to have your user base watch about 12 to 15 interstitials per day. So that means that you're aiming for anywhere between 18 to 25 playable minutes over 5 sessions per day, because that means you have users' attention playing games for about 1,200 seconds, which means that you can show interstitial every 90 seconds and get to those numbers, right? So if you start by knowing that, hey, I need to get to 12 to 15 interstitials, then you kind of know like, okay, I need to design a game that has levels that take about 90 seconds to complete because then it's a natural break. So founders that know that, they go like, oh, okay, that's what I need to design. And then they give that direction.
Fascinating. How long are those interstitials typically?
They are supposed to be 5 seconds skippable. Now they've kind of gone to 15 seconds unskippable. the last bastion of a holdout was Google, which announced quite recently that they're hopping
Yes.
on the AppLovin and Unity bandwagons, making ad units a lot longer. So now they're
Yeah.
more likely 15 seconds.
Interesting, because we kind of see some of these ad units smush, right? You've got interstitials, you've got rewarded, and you see elements of both kind of coming together.
Yep. And they're getting longer and they're getting harder to click out of, and it's dragging more and more on retention. And yeah, it's quite interesting.
One of the games that I play, I've got to tap, I think at least twice, probably 3 times to get out of that thing. And it's a rewarded ad, so I've signed up to watch it and to see it, and there's a playable component to it, and then there's the X. It takes 5 seconds now, maybe 7 seconds to completely fill up, right, and all that. Interesting. Okay, so you talked about founders and knowing what they need to get. Now you focus on ads, but of course you're talking about hybrid monetization as well. That how do those founders decide what monetization models are best suited to their game? Because what we're seeing, I think, is people increasingly going to many different models of monetization. And if they don't get somebody on the ads, they'll get somebody on the iApps or maybe even a subscription.
Yeah, I mean, the games that I see scaling at least like the most recently is like a couple of examples. There's Grand Games with Color Swords from Turkey that's looking like it's going to be an absolute monster. There's Hexasort, which has scaled a lot. And basically, the best way to scale in today's climate, at least when you're on kind of the casual spectrum or hybrid casual spectrum, is to have a mix between IAP and also ads, right? And what the kind of trend is that's exemplified so well if you play Hexasort, which is we covered it on our podcast, and it's on a $250 million a year run rate. And 70% of that is ad revenue, and the rest is IAP revenue. And what the innovation in this game, which is pretty much going to go to, I think, majority of all other games pretty soon, is that instead of segmenting on geo basis, they segment users based on user acquisition campaign. So everything in mobile gaming goes back to user acquisition and how important that is. Doesn't matter what your product is. If you have good distribution, you're probably able to do quite decently, right? So how does this look? So the different types of main UA campaigns right now is IAP driven campaigns where you're optimizing users to make IAP purchases, which is, traditional and good. Then you have blended ROAS, which is you have a mix between ad watches and IAP. And then you have ad ROAS campaigns, right? There's a couple of networks that do these. I think it's Mintegral, AppLovin, and Unity might be an extra one. I had to ask Mate for the next one. So
Mm-hmm.
people who are able, or companies are able to utilize all these user acquisition formats are able to scale. But that means you need to have a monetization model that allows you to run these campaigns. So how segmentation was done before was you have a lot slower cooldown periods in some geos. How it's done in Hexasort is they basically tag it within their MMP partner, right? And then basically, if it comes from an IAP campaign, you don't see ads for the first 3 days. So it keeps this
Wow.
premium feel, so it increases the likelihood of you making an IAP. If
Wow.
you're an organic user or if you are a ad ROAS users, you see ads after the first time user experience.
Mm-hmm.
So they're really piling on the ads.
So that's super interesting. So they have totally different campaigns when they're targeting people who are going to buy, totally different campaigns are targeting people with ads. And that's working extremely well. You're talking $250 million annual run rate.
Yep. It's insane. It's probably the most innovative game in the hybrid space right now that's come out in the last 2 years. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Do people ever switch cohorts, segments?
I don't know. I would have to be on the inside. I'm kind of looking at it from the outside and hearing gossip, right? So I wouldn't know. I would imagine also they're running quite different creatives for the different segments. Probably more hyper casually for the ad ones and basically highlighting the easiness of play, and the IAP, the puzzliness of the game. I should imagine. I'm no UA manager though, so I wouldn't
Yes.
know. But yeah, that's
Yes.
kind of an interesting innovation.
It's super interesting. It's kind of what we were talking about maybe even 2 years ago, where you're in the same game, but the experience is totally different. The game experience is personalized to you. Maybe not personalized, but certainly segmented, customized to your segment, to your cohort. Super, super interesting. I want to get to the Goldilocks problem, right? Too much, not enough, just right. How do you maximize your monetization versus, not push it too far? Because I feel like in a lot of cases, we're on the edge and apps are on the edge of pushing it too far with these ad models we just talked about, these ad units we just talked about that are getting longer and longer and longer. And if you're thinking 90 seconds of gameplay, 5 seconds of interstitial, that's one thing. If you're thinking 90 seconds of gameplay and then 35 seconds, big difference.
Yeah, I mean, let me read something to you. So I have the end cards and ad durations of a prominent leading network. And the max duration for rewarded in their highest category is 114 seconds for a rewarded video. Yeah. That's the thing
Oh,
with networks, right? So this really comes back to a question of we're getting between the line cut, like the lioness and her cub, right? So what we're really talking about with end cards and creative length here is the profitability of publicly traded behemoth companies, right? So the longer and higher CTR of rewarded videos and interstitials, the higher the margin for these companies, right? And if you look at Athlon stock price over the last 2 years, it's up 300%, right? And
yeah.
also what's happened at the same time is the creative length has gotten longer, right? So this trend is not going to change because the money is not going to let them change. So what can you do as an active, knowledgeable player in the system is to realize that you can ask networks to reduce these and have limits. But the
Mhm.
extra clever thing to ask yourself if you have a game or an app is where is the perfect amount of length and retention, right? Because that's what you're fighting off, right?
Mhm.
So really what you should do, or the clever people, what they do is like, this 30 seconds rewarded video, like it just came out of nothing. It's like no one ever tested it. It's like a very weirdly round number to have, right? There's nothing behind that. So
It's almost like it came
yeah,
from old school TV ad
exactly.
commercials, which were 30
Exactly.
seconds. Who would have thought?
Yeah. So also with these games, I also see people experimenting with what they allow with the end cards and the creative length. And, the ECPM goes up the longer the creatives, right? Because you have better CTR, right? So they pass that on to you in terms of higher ECPM. So maybe you need to experiment with this. Maybe you want to put 45 seconds, 15 seconds. It's different in the type of genre, right? But
Mhm.
this is also what highlights a bit how lopsided our industry is, because it's very unfair for new developers. Like if you don't have contacts at networks, like try speaking to someone at Mintegral if you're earning 3K a day, 500 a day with Mintegral to have shorter end cards. Like it's quite hard, right?
Mhm.
And then you
Mhm.
have these large companies that are earning 250, 350, a million a day, where they have
Mhm.
account managers, where they have an advantage, right? So it's harder to break into it. But the first key to breaking into it is just knowledge. If you
Yeah.
know how much an impression costs, if you know that you can change this, if you know you can have a dialogue with networks, and if you can have that dialogue, you're already ahead, right?
And you can also choose monetization partners who have different units with different lengths. The
They don't
challenge
exist
there
anymore.
is
They don't exist.
they're all
Google,
standardized,
Google,
as we just
Google,
talked
Google
about.
was the last. Yeah, Google was the
Yes.
last, and they're also jumping on the bandwagon because it's like a race to the bottom, right? So, yeah,
It's a tough day to be a games publisher. Wow, there's so much to figure out. UA is really, really challenging. The ads are expensive. And then when you try and recoup some of that, ouch as well. So we talked.
there is light at the tunnel though, because the one thing I'm seeing increasing quite a lot is web shops and people driving a lot. So basically, I think it's the most fascinating part of our industry right now because it's essentially a dark pool of money. Like Sensor Tower
Mhm.
doesn't know how much money it is. The app stores don't know. All I know, and some of my clients that I work with, they're driving like 40% of their IP sales through web shops. And it's insane. And, Google and Apple are scared of doing anything because they're scared of antitrust. And
Yeah.
I think there's this giant dark pool of earnings in mobile right now that no one has any idea how big it is. And It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. We see way more web traffic for UA as well as just where web is a part of the journey to capture a user so that we get their information, maybe buy something there, or maybe we know that we can reach out to them later. Absolutely growing in our latest quarterly trends report. We're talking about that as well. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about balance. One way that you just mentioned from the game you mentioned was, hey, we've got different cohorts, different segments that we target, and these are our admon users, and these are our IAP users. And I ask you the question, do they ever hop? And I'm sure that happens, but if you're not an insider, you don't know. How do you avoid some cannibalization here, and how do you fit in all the different components of monetization?
So I can give an example. So I worked with a Match 3 client quite recently, right? And they wanted to add ads. And traditionally, this is not a ad heavy type of thing or a type of genre, right? But
Mhm.
there are ads in a lot of Match 3 games. And like, for example, King, right? Like in tier 2 and tier 3 geos, it's an ad driven game, not an IP driven game. And rumored is that like King is earning something like 800 million a year in ads. So it
Ouch.
can be done, right? But basically, if the game's already launched, the best thing to start with is by launching a segment. So what you usually do is you look at the purchase window. So you look at the average
Mhm.
time where majority or like 95% of first time IAPs take place. That can be 14 days, 21 days, 23 days, whatever that number is. And then after that, you're quite confident that this user won't be making any purchases. And that's when you start showing the ad placements that give up the economic value that otherwise would be tied to the
Mhm.
IAPs, right? That makes
Mhm.
the ads valuable, but also it's less likelihood that, you're going to have a different IAP. Or you do it the King model where you accept that in India, Malaysia, Philippines, you'll never have IAPs. So you rip it out completely and
Yeah.
just do the whole economy with reward ads.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. It's really interesting when you look at different audiences and building different monetization strategies. I think that's super smart. I mean, like, why are you going to push something that nobody is ever going to buy? I have it in games that I enjoy, but they're always pushing something. And I have no clue what that is. I don't even know how to use that in the game. I'm never going to buy that. And they, I guess it's not super sophisticated publishers, and they're not picking up on it and not changing. Wow, weirdness. Okay, so we've got multiple methods of monetization. We're changing them for different segments. Uh, how about measurement now? Ads are notoriously challenging to measure how much revenue you're getting from them, right? It's dependent on a lot of different things. It's from many different partners in some cases. What are some strategies around getting that number?
I mean, so you usually track it inside your mediation platform, right? The issue is that the mediation platform connects to the networks that you mediate with, right?
Mhm.
So there is always discrepancy because you're dealing with very large numbers. Like if you have a couple 100,000 impressions a day, that means you're having, millions of ad requests and they're from different places. So basically, there's always kind of accepted in our industry that plus 2 to 3% or minus 2 to 3% can just be accepted because it's all tied in the mediation platform, which does a good job. But there's
That's true.
also issues with getting the right number. So majority of people that are earning a lot of ad revenue tend to tie in this directly somehow with the platform. So if you're working with,
Mhm.
let's say, Mintical, Unity, and Iron Source, you have a direct link so you actually can get the right numbers. That's the best way to tie everything in. But
Mhm.
if you're small, like that, you don't really need that, right? But if you're earning 100K a day, then 3K up or down is a lot, right? Especially if it's every day. It adds up to quite big numbers, right? So usually I see that becoming a problem when you're around 35K a day, and then
Mhm.
you can usually afford to pay for the solution.
Mhm. It's interesting. I want to go back to what you were talking about before about testing, because I've talked to people who are like literal experts in A/B testing, and they say like half of A/B tests are completely useless that most people do. And it's really actually challenging and hard to do a good A/B test. And they've seen multiple cases where people made decisions for half a year in their games or in their apps. And it was based on A/B tests that was massively, massively flawed. And they only found out about it later. talk about those challenges, kind of the level to which of the amount of data that you need, the amount of time you need, and the amount of certainty you need that an A/B test result is actually real, is actually happening before you actually move on a decision.
Yeah, it's quite interesting you bring this up because I saw an interview with the product manager at Revolut, and he says we don't do A/B tests because good product managers should know. And then
Oh, just
you speak to
magically.
he was French, so yeah, of course he was confident. So and then you look at speaking when you go to conference, someone speaking from King, and they A/B test everything, right? There's a
Mhm,
happy medium, but like when I talk about testing, like the most successful ones that I see is like how they decide to do a game is based a bit on intuition. But then, for example, color theme and everything like that is just A/B tested when by spending money for UA and seeing what people
mhm,
click on, right? And then
mhm,
for levels, you test like the difficulty and those type of things, right? That's when I see the game teams doing the best. When I talk about A/B tests, usually what I'm comparing from an ad side is ad placements, right? So
mhm.
do you show an interstitial for this cooldown period, and then you're A/B testing and measuring against retention, right? So that's mostly what the type of A/B test I deal with. I'm kind of fortunate to work with some clients that do way more sophisticated ones, but then usually it's like dedicated teams that run it.
Yeah. So that's great. You can get the data science team to design the A/B test. You can get the product team to run the A/B test. You can get the data scientist to say, yes, this is significant, or no, this isn't. We looked at enough data. We had, and if you're in a high volume game, that's a lot easier. If you're in a low volume game, just starting out, then it's really challenging because you're running an A/B test, and you know that maybe half of what you're doing is you're wasting money or losing money,
Yeah.
right? But you kind of have to anyways. Okay, let's talk a little bit about KPIs around AdMon. Um, what KPIs are you looking at? Obviously, you need time spent in the app. Obviously, you need number of users, the app players of the game, that sort of thing, and revenue. Anything else? What else do you look at?
So it depends what kind of life cycles. You can split that into two questions, right? So if I'm working with a team that's really early, let's say like from design part, right? I think the biggest disconnect with someone building a game and an admin person is I know what they're going to get paid for an impression. So
Mhm,
I can tell you that if we have this many impressions, you're going to have an LTV of this. So you need to design something towards that. So I can tell you that one rewarded video impression on Android in the States will earn you between 1 to 3 cents if you have this type of monetization, right? So then you can kind of map out like if I need on average 55% of users watching 3 reward ads and then 9 interstitials, how can I design a gameplay that would allow for that in the economy
mhm, mhm.
or something like that? So that's when it helps being kind of an early part to just kind of add some numbers to it because a lot of game teams are like, oh yeah, we'll add a rewarded there and it'll be great. And it's just like, you need at least 5 rewarded impressions for it to make a difference, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It gets a bit harder when you're bolting something on, which I have a lot of clients with as well. They have a widely successful game and then it's kind of top line is kind of it's kind of declining a bit. And then they want
Yeah.
to be put on ads and then it's always a fight. And
Yes.
it's not as good. It's kind of better if you think about it from early on and you actually just put some numbers to it. Like if you want to have banner revenue, you need to show like 90 banners to your user base to actually earn anything that can contribute to your LTV. Just knowing that in the start helps out a lot. Yeah.
That's a lot of game time. That's a
Yeah, it
lot of
is.
game
It
time.
is a lot of game time. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's look to the future. We're getting near, well, we're in November as we're recording this, right? And 2025 is around the corner. Some tips for developers, publishers who are looking to scale their games, grow their revenue in 2025.
Okay. I'm going to sound like the Grinch. Christmas is dead and Black Friday is in. Um, there has been no Q4 for the last 3 years. And all the ECPM games that used to be in December month are now concentrated in Black Friday month. So
Mhm,
the biggest hack I tell my clients right now is get extremely aggressive on ads from Thanksgiving till Cyber Monday. And what does that mean in reality? So that means reduce cooldown time periods for interstitials, sometimes by like 20 or 50%. So you have more, yeah, like you have less
volume.
retention for this weekend, but it's okay because you're going to make so much money on this weekend. Decrease banner refresh rates, and then, put some high calls to kind of suck up as much money as you can this weekend. But the sad part is that what used to be 3 weeks of amazingness is now just 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, cool. Bad news, with a little bit of silver lining if you get on it right away. Anything else for 2025?
So we had a really interesting 2024 in terms of ECPMs. They're 30% lower than last year. And inventory, we're getting paid less for it. I personally think it's the shift to bidding that's causing this, because then all these publishers are moved from being price setters to price takers. I believe kind of we've reached bottom on it, and I don't think ECPMs are going to decrease that much more. I hope I'm not wrong, but yeah, it's been a rough year. I mean, this is kind of what broke the hyper casual games back, right? This 30% decrease.
Is it possible that 30% decrease is related to everybody getting more aggressive with ads? And so there being much more inventory and therefore prices coming down?
The way I look at this, which is a really clever question, I speak to some clients about exactly this, right? So the best indicator you can look at is the amount of customers that are paying for Unity, right? And the amount of customers that are paying for Unity 2 years ago was 780,000, and now it's like 790,000. So it hasn't changed. And then the amount of customers earning over 100 grand a year, it's still like 1,300, right? So it's about the same, right? So same amount of developers. And then that means roughly the same amount of games, right? So the only thing that I can see from my side that's happened in the same space of time is that 2 years ago, 50% was on bidding, 50% was on placements. And now 90% is on bidding, right? So that's the only thing that's changed.
Yes.
And
that
kind of,
typically,
I think I'm
historically, over the history of advertising, has caused prices to come down.
But here's the interesting part, right? So CPIs have slightly increased or remained the same, right? But the stock prices of the companies selling the ads have increased, right? So where did the margin go?
Where is that money going?
I mean, I hold quite a lot of networks stock, right? So it's just, I just see this, which is like, yeah.
But this is good for you.
To see. Let's see. But yeah, I think also one of the interesting things, which has been a small trend that's increasing a lot, is e-commerce is finally finding its way to gaming. Makes no sense that there wasn't that much e-commerce before. You've seen the rise of Amazon Publisher Service, since they had so much interest that they've closed new publishers. So you can't get it anymore. And then you have Max or AppLovin Max. They kind of started with a new initiative around e-commerce. And more you're seeing e-commerce ads in gaming, right? So that could be one of the redeeming saving features, because it makes total sense, right? That's the only thing that can keep with the same LTV kind of competition and programmatic demand as gaming.
Yeah. It is interesting. And yet, if we bring in a macro level lens to this conversation here about ad prices in games, I mean, if you look at the history of advertising for, let's say, the past 40 years, I'm going to say the wrong numbers here, but I'll put the right ones on the screen later on. I did a presentation at I think it was Mao Vegas last year. And yes, I'll see you there next year.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll be there. But I brought in the numbers for amount of ad dollars spent globally per human alive. And I'm throwing a number at random here. I might even be right. It was like $200 in 2024, right? But if you go back like 2 decades, it was more like $30 or $50. I'll put the right numbers on screen, but it was a massive increase. Well, that's not something that can continue infinitely.
I guess you can really thank Google and Apple for having the worst shitty experience for finding apps and discoverability in their app stores for a lot of that, right?
Somebody's always to blame.
Exactly.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Felix, as always, this has been a ton of fun. I've enjoyed having this conversation. Thank you for sharing some nuggets about what's going on and what will be happening. Do really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.